Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. We provide you with the exciting news Catherine just confesses, a heartbreaking news about Prince Louis. The winter light was tenuous and wan, reminiscent of oblivion. It descended upon London at 8:06 a.m., with the indifferent elegance of many previous mornings, lighting the hasty routines of a metropolis rousing from slumber. This morning was distinct. This dawn quiet will descend. It emerged not with a siren or a broadcast disruption, but with the subdued resonance of a million handheld displays illuminating simultaneously. A solitary, unambiguous message from Kensington Palace, a declaration by Catherine, Princess of Wales. The words were few, carefully refined to exclude any trace of alarm, but they bore the profound gravity of a fact capable of undermining a monarchy's foundations. After a series of medical visits, William and I have discovered that our son Prince Louis has been diagnosed with a disease requiring continuous care. We are dedicated to provide him with affection, stability, and the privacy he merits. That concludes everything. No medical euphemisms to mitigate the impact, no optimistic platitudes to shape the discourse. The stark, poignant reality. In only minutes, the meticulously established cadence of the nation's mourning was disrupted. On the BBC, the newsreader's voice, often a paragon of unwavering authority, wavered momentarily. Sky News anchors halted their gazes, scanning the teleprompter for absent words, seeking a means to understand the unfathomable. Even across the Atlantic, where darkness remained profound, networks interrupted their programming with the urgent grave tone designated for events of historical significance. A throng started to assemble outside the frigid, dark gates of Kensington Palace, compelled by an instinct predating contemporary news cycles. They stood in the moist cold not as subjects or observers, but as individuals. Some raised their phones, scrutinizing the text as if to refute it. Individuals, especially the older demographic who witnessed the fairy tale of Charles and Diana devolve into tragedy, murmured a similar prayer-like refrain, a sentiment resonating in households and workplaces nationwide. Oh God, not the children. A deep collective anguish enveloped Britain, a sorrow that no protocol could restrain and no press statement could alleviate. Prince Louis, the 5-year-old embodiment of mischief, whose unrestrained exuberance at public events had come to represent a contemporary and more informal monarchy, was now confronting a domestic struggle that his parents had fervently sought to hide. At the center of this turmoil stood Catherine. Within the palace, sources verified that the ambiance was characterized by oppressive tranquility. The choice to issue the statement had been a burden she had borne for weeks. Drafts were composed, dismantled, and revised during the alone hours after her children's slumber. Each iteration represented a renewed endeavor to resolve an insurmountable dilemma: how to safeguard a son's boyhood while fulfilling the public's tacit agreement with the crown. William, always protective, volunteered to face the cameras and convey the news himself. However, she had declined. A bystander to the dialogue disclosed her silent, steadfast determination. "This is my obligation," she had informed him the previous night, her tone unwavering but tinged with vulnerability. "I will not let this tale to go public without my account." At that point, she transcended her role as the future queen consort, fulfilling a constitutional obligation. She became a mother asserting control over her son's story before it could be distorted by conjecture. This was her truth to disclose. As the world awaited, a revelation emerged that would alter everything. The invisible shadow. The first indications of the crisis were almost imperceptible, as subtle and insidious as a seasonal transition. These were ephemeral moments that constitute the essence of motherhood, readily attributed to growth, spurts, the demands of a new academic term, or the inherent unexpected patterns of a child's vitality. The occurrence started in late September, a period when the Wales family generally acclimated to the soothing rhythm of fall. A subtle transformation had taken place in Prince Louis. A subtle sag on the couch after a day of recreation, an atypical moment of introspection over a family lunch, when he leaned his head on his father's arm and seemed to withdraw inside. William, according to sources, originally aimed to alleviate the subtle concern shown in his wife's eyes. "He is only fatigued," he would whisper, a logical justification that temporarily alleviated the growing disquiet. However, Catherine's maternal instinct, honed by years of scrutiny in the public eye, could not be simply assuaged. She had acquired the ability to interpret subtle signals, distinguishing between youthful caprice and the first indication of something more significant. The monarchy, especially in contemporary times, is an institution founded on the semblance of impeccable continuity. The health and vigor of its offspring are not only a private concern, they represent a tangible emblem of the crown's future, a visible assurance of stability. For a woman in her situation, each cough and misstep has a significance that beyond the typical concerns of parenthood. In early October, the first meeting was organized with the surgical discretion often reserved by the palace for its most delicate procedures. There were no official vehicles or security details. The pediatric doctor they saw at a luxury London facility was meticulous and comforting. Nonetheless, his failure to provide a conclusive response created an unsettling atmosphere. He solicited further testing and further observation. Catherine reportedly departed from the session with an initial constriction of genuine anxiety in her chest. The ambiance at Kensington Palace started to shift. The change was evident to the veteran employees who were intimately familiar with the family's patterns. Assistants were discreetly directed to limit Louis's public appearances. The engagements involving all three Wales children were discreetly altered. No explanations were provided, although the adjustment of the young prince's visibility signaled a definitive establishment of a protected perimeter inside the palace environment. Those closest to Catherine saw the stress emerging behind her flawless demeanor. During briefings, her attention would waver momentarily. The sound of a child's cough echoing down a lengthy hallway would cause her head to rise. Her phone, formerly disregarded during meetings, has become a source of persistent, subtle anxiety. The pivotal incident that dismantled all efforts at rationality occurred on an unremarkable school morning in mid-October. Louis halted at the base of the big staircase, his pause stemming not from malice or procrastination, but from a deep and disquieting doubt. A little quiver in his tiny hand. Catherine knelt alongside him, her voice a gentle murmur. "Are you well, dear?" He acquiesced, however, his eyes conveyed another narrative. The little, almost undetectable instant served as the trigger. Subsequent to escorting her youngsters to school, she withdrew to her study. Upon the entrance of her private secretary moments later, she was discovered perched on the edge of a couch, her fists gripped so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Kindly contact the specialist," she said, her tone without passion but laden with purpose. "I want the further test to be rescheduled to an earlier date." The monarchy's protecting facade abruptly closed. Meetings were relocated to soundproof rooms. Internal messages were intentionally ambiguous. A family reunion in Windsor exhibited a novel and unarticulated tension. Princess Anne, a lady with keen intuition and biting humor, saw Louis's transient grimace of distress while seated on the frigid garden stairs. Her eyes locked with Catherine's across the terrace, and in that wordless communication, the truth was spoken more clearly than any words could express. Subsequently, in an uncommon display of bodily solace, Anne rested a hand on Catherine's shoulder. The Princess Royal affirmed, "You are doing everything correctly," her tone soothingly pragmatic. "Regardless of what this is, you are confronting it directly." However, Catherine's response, hardly audible, betrayed the profound terror lurking behind. "I only want for him to be well." The subtle catastrophe. The diagnosis was not delivered by a panicked phone call or a grave meeting. A solitary cream-colored letter arrived amid the antiseptic calm placed on a polished table in Catherine's private sitting room at Windsor. The date was November 22nd. A frigid, piercing wind shook the venerable window panes of the castle, a stronghold designed to endure assaults but completely defenseless against the incursion of a medical reality. For 2 days, the princess had been in a condition of suspended animation, awaiting the outcomes of the conclusive tests. She had fortified herself for this moment, practicing her responses and strengthening her determination. However, planning serves as a tenuous barrier against reality. Upon seeing the envelope, she comprehended. Her fingers shook almost slightly when she broke the seal, as noticed by a keen observer. The room was completely silent. The diagnosis was articulated in clear, empathetic, but unflinching terms. Prince Louis suffered from a chronic ailment. It was controllable, not lethal. However, it was perpetual. It would need significant modifications, continuous medical treatment, and a comprehensive reassessment of what constitutes a normal upbringing for a kid born third in line to the throne. The news occupied a dreadful gray space between relief and heartbreak: relief that it was not the worst possible result, and profound grief that it was not the clean bill of health for which she had hoped. She collapsed into the couch, the papers loosely resting on her lap, and concentrated on her breathing, a frantic effort to stabilize herself in the unsteady world. William discovered her there upon his return from London. The effortless grin on his face dissipated at his sighting of the packet. "Is that all?" he inquired, his voice subdued. She effortlessly presented him with the documents. He read them with the systematic concentration of an individual adept at assimilating intricate briefs under significant strain, his jaw clenching with each phrase. He placed the papers down with a solemnity often reserved for a holy book or a death sentence. The quiet in the room was complete for an extended duration. Catherine was the one who shattered it. "We can handle this," she murmured, the statement reflecting her determination more than her certainty. William approached her, clasping her hand with both of his. "We shall," he confirmed. "We consistently do." However, despite his offer of support, he saw the burden of the future bearing down upon him. It was not only the diagnosis, it was its public aspect. He more than anyone else comprehended the harsh transformation by which the media converts personal suffering into public commodity. His youth marred by his mother's dogged pursuit, Diana had imparted the lesson that the monarchy offers no refuge for its anguish. The palace's most confidential and grave processes were initiated within the hour. This was not a communication plan. It constituted a situation of emergency. Only 5 persons were promptly notified: the King, Princess Anne, the couple's most trusted private secretary, the top medical liaison, and a solitary communications advisor bound to strict confidentiality. Digital data underwent encryption. Internal communications were written in euphemistic language. The royal schedule was meticulously restructured to provide a protective barrier around the Wales family. Princess Anne came the next morning via a separate door designated for instances of utmost confidentiality. In a modest drawing room, Catherine articulated the diagnosis with a clinical detachment that in itself indicated great shock. Anne listened, her face inscrutable, before extending her hand across the table to grasp hers. "He is robust," she said, a straightforward assertion of reality, "more resilient than he realizes. And he possesses you." Catherine's demeanor finally faltered. "I want for him to grow free from this burden," she said, her voice laden with sorrow. Anne's typically stern expression softened. "Children acclimate more rapidly than we do," she said sagely. "It is the world that contends, not them." At Clarence House, King Charles took the news with the fatigued resignation of a monarch who had endured several familial crises. He listened quietly, resting heavily on his cane. "My unfortunate boy," he said, a sorrowful expression that seemed to include not only his tiny grandson Louis, but also his son William, who must now traverse the perilous path of safeguarding a defenseless youngster while preparing to eventually assume the throne. Camilla, informed, independently responded with subtle empathy, conveying a succinct but impactful message to Catherine. "You are not alone." However, as darkness enveloped Windsor, Catherine found herself in Louis's chamber, observing his slumber. Bathed in the gentle illumination of the nightlight, she swept the hair off his forehead and was confronted with a realization that both shattered her heart and solidified her determination. The diagnosis did not alter his identity. However, it would alter the surrounding reality. She would be the one to confront that reality. The Fortress of Quietude. The morning after the diagnosis, Windsor Castle was enveloped in an eerie silence. The old fortress's stones seemed to have absorbed the family's astonishment, emanating a grave silence that filled every passage. The monarchy was in a state of crisis, transitioning from ceremonial obligations to damage management, operating as a meticulously organized entity governed by procedure and precedent. William conducted the first emergency meeting in a guarded conference room, a sterile environment devoid of royal opulence, designated for instances of significant institutional peril. The intimate assembly convened around the table epitomized the intersection of familial and governmental spheres. Catherine was present, her posture impeccable, her countenance a front of cultivated tranquility that concealed the underlying vulnerability. William positioned himself next to her, serving as both a physical and mental stabilizer. King Charles participated over a secure video connection, his appearance somewhat pixelated, his voice faint but resolute. Three senior aides, their expressions somber, grasped briefing folders. "We must ascertain the means to save Louis." William continued, his tone unequivocal, "and how to ready oneself for the inevitable consequences." The menace was already accumulating. Louis's reduced frequency of public appearances has not escaped attention. Royal observers, including both amateur detectives and expert analysts, had begun linking the clues. Online murmurs were emerging, subtle and conjectural, but increasing with each day. The medical liaison initiated the discussion, his professional terminology sharply contrasting with the emotional gravity of the topic. He elaborated on the long-term care strategy, the need for continuous oversight, and the possible effects of stress on the young prince's health. Public events, he continued solemnly, must be managed with utmost caution. Princess Anne, always pragmatic, addressed the core issue directly. "We must brace for narratives to evolve beyond our influence," she said, her tone incisive. "A strategy must be established for when not, if the media takes notice." King Charles sighed loudly from the screen. "The family must provide a unified response," he said. "This must not devolve into another tempest of conjecture." His statement lingered, a poignant allusion to the public rift between Harry and Meghan, a crisis from which the monarchy was still recuperating. The apprehension of a recurrence of a very intimate family issue being exploited in the international media was a tangible atmosphere in the room. The crisis team delineated three prospective methods, each with a straightforward internal code name. The first action was a preemptive declaration managing the narrative by disclosing the diagnosis on their own terms. The second was a partial disclosure, an ambiguous remark on a health issue. The third was to preserve total secrecy, using a policy of utter quiet, persisting until the barrier was compromised. Catherine gazed over the alternatives, detesting the impersonal, dispassionate terminology. This was not a policy endeavor. It pertained to her son's life. "I want his protection from examination for as long as feasible," she said, her tone kind but resolute. "He is rather youthful. He is deserving of that." William offered his support, however the turmoil was evident on his countenance. He comprehended the obligation to the institution and the unyielding need for openness. With each passing day of inaction, a communications expert warned, softly, speculation will intensify. Unrestrained conjecture is far more detrimental than the facts. The conflict between the maternal impulse to safeguard and the monarchy's need to maintain control was starkly shown. Upon the conclusion of the conference, Catherine withdrew to a garden terrace, the frigid winter air providing a refreshing contrast against her skin. William accompanied her. "I continually ponder," she said, her voice faltering for the first time. "Did I overlook anything previously? Could we have detected it earlier? It is the perennial, tormenting inquiry of every parent confronted with a child's disease, a weight of self-reproach that no status or luxury can mitigate." William embraced her tightly. "This is not your responsibility," he said vehemently. "You executed all actions correctly. You consistently do." Subsequently, Charles had a private discussion with his son and sister. His voice conveyed the fatigue of a man who had devoted a career to navigating the perilous waters of public existence. "We must avert another spiral," he said, his intent clear. "Should this emerge as a worldwide topic of discussion prior to our preparedness, the backlash will be severe." Anne's demeanor stiffened. "This does not constitute a scandal," she said. "This pertains to a child's health. The press must exercise restraint." Charles said, his tone subdued and despondent. "It is imperative," he said. "However, I am skeptical that they will." The palace had transformed into a fortress, gearing up for a siege. However, the inquiry pervading its hallways was no longer the fate of Prince Louis, but rather when the world would be informed and how they would endure the ensuing tumult. The unavoidable violation. The secret was not divulged by a paid informant or a senior-level breach. It was dismantled by the banal mechanisms of contemporary bureaucracy. A solitary line in a misfiled administrative report at a London hospital, a transient digital glitch was sufficient to ignite the situation. On the morning of November 29th, a senior communications assistant, His complexion pallid hurried into Windsor with a printed document. A junior staffer in the hospital's billing department had seen a royal code linked to a note about ongoing medical assessments for Prince Louis. The clerk alerted a supervisor, who then made a remark that generated a surge of adrenaline across the palace's command hierarchy. The supervisor allegedly said to a colleague, "If the press were aware of this, they would get enraged." The palace was unaware of the number of individuals who had eavesdropped on that comment. The leak has been stopped temporarily. Nonetheless, the seal has been compromised. Catherine, upon receiving the news, felt the ground shift under her. Thus it commences, she murmured the phrase, a subdued capitulation to the unavoidable. For months, she had endured the anxiety of this very moment, the instant her family's private anguish would transform into a public spectacle, her son's health reduced to mere gossip and cliques. William's response was prompt and resolute. "We will preempt it," he said, his hand locating hers. "We will not let them to dictate this." The palace apparatus activated with a resounding roar. An emergency conference call linked Windsor Clarence House and the senior legal and communications advisors. King Charles, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and exasperation, remained steadfast. "We must control this," he commanded. "Should a whisper reach the press, they will revel in it." Princess Anne added her voice, her anger, a tangible presence. "This exemplifies the issue with contemporary monarchies," she retorted. "Excessive individuals, excessive systems. Privacy has become an illusion. The hospital management was notified records were secured, and personnel were reminded of their confidentiality obligations. It was like attempting to repair a dam using sand." The dreaded confirmation arrived that evening. An editor from one of Britain's most assertive newspapers sent a meticulously phrased, seemingly nonchalant email to a mid-tier royal press officer. "Is the youngest kid of Wales in good health? We are receiving information from inside medical circles." It served as a journalistic warning signal. The subdued apprehension inside Windsor escalated into overt panic. The palace's official reply was a quintessential Stonewall, a courteous but resolute, no comment on private family problems. However, the tactic had already become outdated. The editor's subsequent email, sent late that evening, was a thinly disguised threat. "It is acknowledged that Prince Louis has recently undergone assessments. We plan to publish until clarity is provided." The ultimatum compelled their action. During a midnight assembly, fatigue enveloping them like a veil, William and Catherine confronted their counselors. "The period of quiet has ended." Catherine said, her voice imbued with newfound determination. "We must not allow them to compel our actions. We must prevent this from escalating into chaos." William gazed at her, then at the table where the diagnosis remained a delicate document, emblematic of their new world. "We convey the truth," he said softly. "However, just the portion that pertains to us, not the portion that pertains to him." The difference was essential. They would acknowledge the conflict, but they would protect the kid. The leak had not yet become public knowledge, but it had penetrated the royal defenses. They recognized that this had altered everything. The bastion of stillness was on the verge of collapse. A maternal voice. The morning Catherine addressed the world was disconcertingly tranquil. A frigid, crystalline December light enveloped the grounds of Windsor, highlighting each blade of frost-laden grass. She awoke before dawn, seated in the tranquility of her chamber, consolidating the power she had been conserving for weeks. The external strain had grown intolerable, a constricting circle of conjecture around a youngster oblivious to the tempest forming in his name. However, her ultimate conclusion was not an acquiescence. It constituted an act of reclaiming. The previous night, a brief, intimate experience had solidified her determination. Louis awoke from a fitful slumber, his voice faint in the obscurity, inquiring if he must return to the location with the cacophonous machinery. As William knelt to comfort him, Catherine lingered in the threshold, observing the two individuals she cherished most, and recognized with unwavering conviction that she could not permit faceless sources and sensationalist headlines to narrate her son's tale. If a truth were to be articulated, it would be her prerogative to express it. At 7:00 a.m., she occupied her private sitting area with a solitary handwritten sheet positioned on the table before her. The palace communication staff had crafted many versions, all meticulously articulated, in the prudent formal vernacular of the crown. She displaced them. This, she informed William, is the only version that has significance. He perused her words orderly and unwavering on the page. They were straightforward, sincere, and vehemently protective. They acknowledged a medical issue but provided no specifics, only requesting the privacy that any family would want. "It is sincere," William said gently, "and it protects him. That is all I desire," she said. The senior royals came not as a formal council, but as a united family. Princess Anne, having traversed the early morning fog from Gatcombe Park, put a resolute hand on Catherine's shoulder. "This is the proper way to proceed," she said. King Charles, appearing on a secure screen, regarded his daughter-in-law with an expression of deep pride and melancholy. "My darling girl," he said softly, "I really wish you were not burdened by this." Even Camilla's interjection was surprisingly sympathetic. "You are doing like any mother would," she said. "You are doing it with elegance." The statement was issued at 9:30 a.m. For a little period, the world seemed to halt. Newsrooms became quiet. Social media feeds, sometimes a source of skepticism, surged with a wave of astonishment and genuine empathy. Catherine's calm, measured tone further intensified the terrible impact of her comments. She had not disclosed a diagnosis. She had exposed a family's fragility. Within Windsor, far from the din, the Wales family convened. Prince Louis, oblivious to the worldwide news announcement associated with him, pulled on his mother's sleeve, inquiring why the atmosphere had become so subdued. Catherine knelt, drawing him into a passionate hug, and uttered a truth that was both intimate and exposed. "You are cherished," she informed him. At that time, among the venerable stones of a castle built for royalty, the House of Windsor was strengthened not by crowns or titles, but by the indomitable spirit of a family safeguarding its members. The winter storm had come, and its winds would redefine the monarchy's destiny. Yet within the tumult, a mother's voice resonated, and for the moment that sufficed. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.